And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. This is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on Sunday, August 24th, 2025. And starting with the state of the sea ice, we have open water all along the Chukchi Sea coast and most of the Beaufort Sea coastline. Still some areas of pack ice remnant there, generally though offshore of Kaktovik. And the slow melt-off will continue here, though we have maybe only a few more weeks before we reach minimal ice extent. We certainly are going to have more active weather, windier conditions through the Bering Strait, setting up here with this series of lows and fronts that are working their way up into the southwest and western part of the state. So on the satellite image as of this Sunday afternoon, weak low pressure here in the North Pacific. Areas of the Panhandle seeing sunshine, warm temperatures inland from sea level. Number of spots have hit the 70s, even 80s in the southern Panhandle. And off to the west, another low is crossing west of Adak, and that'll be taking a quick course northeastward up toward Nome by Monday afternoon. And then we have a frontal boundary with a feed of moisture that extends. This frontal boundary is along and just south of the Yukon River and then extends southwestward, and moisture, tropical moisture, is streaming northeastward along that boundary as these low pressure systems come northeastward. So we do have active weather on Monday. We still have the high pressures in place along and just off of the Panhandle, Haida Gwaii. It'll provide yet another warm day in the Panhandle, not quite as warm as Saturday and Sunday, but some areas still could see 70s and isolated 80-degree reading in the southern Panhandle. But we've had the one low go from Sunday afternoon in this position all the way up to the Seward Peninsula, and with it, more rain being enhanced, the southerly moist flow, heavier rain setting up along the south slopes of the Brooks Range. Flood watch is there. And then we have Monday morning, afternoon, especially for high tide on Monday afternoon. Kuskokwim Bay or Delta has the potential for some, there's a coastal flood advisory for water levels 1.5 to 3 feet above the normal high tide. And again, that feature, already we have one low come in northeast. Here comes the next one on Tuesday. This will have another push of breezy conditions into Bristol Bay and some moderate to heavier rainfall pushing in through the southwest interior along and west of the Alaska Range through the Kuskokwim River Valley. And then by the time we get into Thursday, another low will be coming up from a similar position. So active weather continuing there. Eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, west side of the state into the interior. Monday's marine forecast for the Panhandle, relatively dry, and we're looking at light winds inner channels, south winds to 10 knots, Lynn Canal waves 1 foot or 2. Variable winds around Petersburg with waves just 1 foot or 2. Northwest winds 15 knots. Dixon entrance waves a couple of feet. Outer coast outside of Cross Sound down to off of Craig, we're looking at northwest winds 15 to 20 knots, waves maybe 4 or 5 feet, and then westerly winds into Yakutat Bay and Cape Suckling at 10 knots with 2-3 foot waves. On Tuesday, still southerly winds 10 knots there within Lynn Canal, waves 1 foot or 2, and then northwest winds 10 to 15 knots from Stevens Passage down through Dixon Entrance, waves 2 to maybe 3 feet tops. Outside of Cross Sound down to off of Sitka, Port Alexander, and Prince of Wales Island, northwest winds 20 knots, waves 5-6 feet, northwest winds 15 knots outside of Yakutat and Cape Suckling. Still relatively light winds. We have nudged into the corner, this northwest corner of the Gulf, Hinchinbrook Entrance, Prince William Sound, Kayak Island, light variable winds 10 knots tops, waves just 1 foot or 2 Prince William Sound, maybe 2-3 feet outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. Winds will be a bit stronger up through Cook Inlet, southeast winds to 25 knots, Kennedy Entrance, and then south to southwest winds picking up once you get around Kenai on up toward Fire Island. We're looking at southwest winds of 25 knots with 5 to 6 foot waves. On Tuesday, winds are going to become east-southeasterly, Prince William Sound outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance at 20 knots with waves 4 feet or so. Still southeast winds, 25 knots there around Kennedy Entrance into Kamishak Bay with waves 5 to 6 feet. And those winds, as we go up around Anchor Point, southeast becoming southerly at 10 knots with waves 2 to 3 feet, the upper half of Cook Inlet. South winds can be expected around Kodiak Island on Monday at 20 knots with waves 3-4 feet. Those winds, south winds, increase 20 to 25 knots, Sandpoint down to False Pass. And then on the other side, the Bering side, southeast winds, Bristol Bay 20 knots, but increasing 25 to 30 knots north of Cold Bay because we have that front just off to the west. And this is a pretty strong stream of winds heading to the north there into Kuskokwim Bay. And then for Tuesday, look for east-southeast winds 20 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island. And then as much as 30 knots southeasterly winds Bristol Bay and east of Chicknick there before the winds turn westerly coming on down toward the Cold Bay and False Pass. And on Monday, the eastern Aleutians will have southerly winds of 30 knots. Once you get Atka to Adak, those winds become westerly 20-25 knots and then kind of fall off to the west-northwest 15 knots as we get up toward Kiska and Shemya. And then on Tuesday, winds will generally be westerly around 15 knots, eastern and central Aleutians, and then switching northwesterly to 20 knots west of Adak up through Kiska and Shemya. Now here on Monday, again, we have the coastal flood advisory for the Kuskokwim Delta because of southerly winds to 35-knot gales, waves as high as 7 to 10 feet, water levels along Kuskokwim Bay Delta here could be as much as a few feet above the normal high tide on Monday afternoon. And toward the Pribilof, south winds of 30 knots with waves up to 15 feet. And even as we come up along the Yukon coast, Nunavik Island kind of protects that area near Hooper Bay. But as we round Hooper Bay and into Norton Sound, look for south to southeast winds at 20 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet. For Tuesday, still south winds at 30 knots into Bristol Bay because they're going to have that other low kind of come up over here. So that's where the wind will be directed on Tuesday, with more rain overspreading and pushing in through the region both Monday and Tuesday. But the winds are going to shift to the west along the coast, westerly within, because the front pushing east a bit within Kuskokwim Bay, 20-knot west winds, 6-foot waves, and then along the lower Yukon coast, west winds of 10 knots, waves 3 feet, and then south winds to 15 knots in that wider expanse of Norton Sound with waves running around 4 feet. And then for the Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence Island and along the west coast of the Seward Peninsula, Monday, brisk day, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots, waves anywhere from 4 to as high as 6-7 feet on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. Coming up around the Lisburn Peninsula, winds flip to the west once you get to Wainwright up to Utqiagvik at 10 to 15 knots, and then southwest winds 10 to 15 knots, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. And for Tuesday, winds will generally be out of the northeast along the Beaufort Sea coast at 15 knots, increasing a bit to 20 knots, northeast winds off of Wainwright. And then as we go around Cape Lisburn, north winds of 20 knots increasing to 25 knots through the Bering Strait, and there will be higher waves in the lower Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait to the east side of St. Lawrence Island. We're looking at waves of 5 to 7 feet on Tuesday.